Hello, everyone. Welcome to this lecture. Today we have with us Stanislav Smirnov, who is a research mathematician, and some of his achievements include 2 perfect scores at the IMO and a Fields Medal for his work on percolation processes and icing models. Originally from St. Petersburg, he has numerous accolades for his work, including the Salem Prize and Clay Research Award. His interests include complex and geometric analysis, dynamical system, and probability theory. So today he'll be talking about Olympiad problems and math research and how they are similar and different. So thank you very much for being with us today. I would like to hand over to Stanislav.
Okay, thanks Parth for introducing me. So I was told to give like a half an hour talk and then answer questions. So I will share the slides. So it's that's the title, Olympiad Problems in Mathematical Research. Are they similar and different or different? And it's related to a number of questions I received from participants. And it's actually maybe one of the sort of most common questions I get asked from school kids. Is participating Olympiads similar to mathematical research? And if it's not similar, why do we have Olympiads? So the short answer is yes, and well, it depends a bit on the mathematics. There is some mathematics which is about building theories, some about solving problems. A very famous Hungarian mathematician, Paul Halmos, once said, problems are at the heart of mathematics. So indeed, mathematicians do solve problems like you did this week at the Olympiad. So the question is more, what is the difference between problems, 6 problems you had to solve earlier this week, and the ones which you encounter if you become a scientist? So surprisingly, there are International Math Olympiad problems which are derived from actual pieces of research. And which is more surprising, sometimes there are IMO problems which lead to mathematical research. So here's one problem which was when I was at IMO a number of years ago. So that was on Warsaw. It was the 3rd problem, which usually is supposed to be a bit more difficult. And I think it's now most of you will be able to solve it fairly fast. So there is, with this formulation, so there are 5 numbers written on pentagon, and if one of them is negative, you're allowed to do some operation. Then show that eventually this game will end, that you cannot continue infinitely over. So maybe it will work better. Let me show you a drawing. So this is how it looks like, the pentagon game. So if you have, let me just maybe do it like that, pointer options, arrow, yeah. So suppose that, suppose that you see my pointer, yes? Yeah. So suppose that one of the numbers is negative. Then you're allowed to flip it over to a positive one. And then you want to keep the sum 0, so you increased it by 2 red columns. So you have to decrease it. So you decrease to nearby numbers by a red column. So this became less positive, and this one, it became more negative. So you see immediately that sum is kept at the same, and it's clear in such problems that if you ask that some process has to stop, you come up with some semi-invariant which decreases each time but remains positive. Eventually it hits 0, so you stop. So here it's a good problem to find. There were actually, I know actually of 2, and one was found by Jeremy Kahn, who was an American team, but it was much more complicated. So I don't know how he managed to do it in 4.5 hours. And the strange thing that I met him years later as a research mathematician. He has some important prizes like I think Salem and Clay, and did some very, very good research. We almost intersected in theories in what we do. So originally this was motivated by a research question, but what is more interesting that this game has some generalization which made their way in research papers, and they eventually motivated Kendrim Gashi, a mathematician from Kosovo, to solve quite an important conjecture. So it can be that ideas which appear in Olympiads, they make their way in mathematics. So what is the answer to the question after this example? I think I would say there are like 4 differences. That when you get problem on an Olympiad at IMO, it's likely to have a nice solution. Well, first, you can be sure it has a solution. Unless the people who put up together the Olympiad screwed up, that happened in the past. I don't think it happened with IMO, but it happened some Olympiads that people make mistake and put a problem which doesn't have a known solution. So IMO problem has a nice solution, so it's, you know already that it has a solution, people think you can arrive at it, and that's not always true in mathematics. So there are important conjectures, like, you know, Andrew Wiles proved Fermat theorem. People were sure for ages that Fermat theorem is correct. They were sure that and it can be proved. But it could have happened that it's not the case. For example, there is a more famous continuum hypothesis, and it was saying that if you compare infinities, so between countable number of rationals, so integers, and number of real numbers, there is no other infinity. And what was proved eventually by Paul Cohen, that it's neither true, neither false. You can take as axiom this statement that there is no further infinities, or you can take as an axiom that there is, and you'll get a good mathematics either way. It's very much like geometry. Like for a long time, people tried to prove parallels axiom, but you can take it as an axiom, you can the opposite statement. So in math, theoretically, it can happen that the question you encounter has no answer. And IMO, you always know that it does. Also, the IMO problems, well, it's just there is this code of International Math Olympiad that high school mathematics is enough to solve it. So we can come up with some new elementary methods, but if you do research problem, what can happen is that you need some methods you don't know. And mathematics now become very, very vast over the last 200 years. So there are like thousands of books. No person can possibly read all of them. So this is a difficulty. And also it might be that the method you need hasn't been invented yet. And also in Olympiad, you have 4.5 time limit. In math, sometimes you work for years, like Andrew Wiles worked 9 years on Fermat's theorem. And maybe the most important difference is that doing research, you have to select problems to solve yourself, or even come up with your own. It's not that we are giving 3 to solve by the end of the day, but you have to find some interesting problems to solve. And I wanted a bit more speak about this, how you find problems to solve, with just a few examples from my own life. Mathematicians usually either get problems from some technical questions asked by engineers, or from their own interest in like beautiful questions, or from something other scientists ask. So I'll give like 3 examples of problems I was asked by other scientists, but there are also some problems which are interesting in themselves. So this is physics, and physics was the biggest source of problems for mathematicians, for questions. So physicists tried to describe many phenomena like erosion, forest fires, or spread of epidemics, which is important now. And this here, for example, you see it's a mathematical model of erosion. You immediately see that you get some sort of a wiggly fractal curve, as mathematicians would say. So how, well, a physicist comes and asks these questions, what mathematicians do? They try to formulate it as a mathematical problem. So you try to make some mathematical model. So here the easiest model is the so-called percolation model. So it's done on a lattice, and what you do, here I took a hexagonal lattice, and you toss a coin. If it comes up heads, you cover it white. If it comes up tails, you cover it yellow. Independently, you just toss a coin for every hexagon, and you think that there are white holes in a yellow rock. Now you put water on the top, and you ask, can it seep through? So it starts seeping. No, here it's a dead end. Here it's dead end. Here it goes around dead end. It goes. Eventually it went through. Okay, so let me cover it blue. Now, if you have an actual forest or an actual city or an actual piece of rock, it has many, many more trees or many, many more atoms. So you see a picture like this. And can you see whether water can seep through? Here it's much, much more difficult to experiment. You need much better eyeglasses. And if I ask computer to do on this picture, actually I don't even remember because I have several pictures. I made many experiments. Obviously there are some experiments where you can go through, somewhere you can't go through. So the actual question is, what is the probability that you can go through, or how these trajectories look like? So here you cannot. So, so that was a question which was asked by physicists in 40s. So it's 48 mathematicians formulated this problem. And then about 20 years, 25 years ago, in the early 90s, physicists actually came up with a non-rigorous argument that why it's difficult to see. They argued that if there is a path, it's what is called a fractal of dimension 4/3. Now, I think most of you have heard of fractals, have seen beautiful pictures of Julia sets. So in this setting, fractal dimension 4/3 is a set which, if you do it on a square n by n, it has approximately n to the power 4/3 hexagons. So for example, here the size is like about 20 or 40. If you have size 1,000 to the power 4/3, it's 10,000. So if you have a square 10,000 by 1,000, the length of this path will be 10,000, 10 times longer than the size. So it will be very, very wiggly. And if the size will be million by million, then here you will get 100 million. So it will be even wiggly. That's the reason why it's difficult to see. Now, this is an example of a problem which is easy to pose. So it's kind of an interesting connection that physicists asked. It's clear it's something you can observe in nature. Then mathematicians formulate the problem which is easy to formulate, and the answer is also easy. Unfortunately, this proof is rather short. It's like 10 pages, but use some advanced mathematics, and so it's a proof which is very much like Olympiad problems proof. Only it uses more advanced mathematics than high school, so it uses a little bit of complex analysis, a little bit of probability, but it's basically what you usually learn in the first or second year at university. But otherwise, it's very much like an Olympiad problem proof, only a longish one. And now, when already it was proved just very recent, 10 years ago, I discovered that this was given as an Olympiad problem. And this was given as an Olympiad problem in the first volume of American Mathematical Monthly in 1894. So this is this problem. Actually, you can see what kind of problems American school kids were solving 100 years ago. There's many, many, many integrals. But the reason is that back then, what you now study in the first year of university usually was the last year of high school, because now everyone goes to high school, and back then only like 10% of people finished high school. So it was logical the last year is like university. So this is the problem. And then there is a solution which is incorrect. So I will blow it up so that you can read. So that's how the problem is formulated, that an equal number of white and black balls of equal size are thrown into a box. And what is the probability there will be a path of white balls from one end of the other. In a special example, solve a 30 by 30 by balls 10 by 5. And then the solution is quite interesting, because what he solves, this guy, he looks at the probability that there is a straight path. And probability that there is a straight path, if you had a probability in your school, some of you did in some countries in the last year of school, you have a little bit probability, it's very easy to calculate, because there is only some fixed number of lines where you can go through. You can easily calculate probability that on a given line you can go with just having 5 white balls, or you cannot go with at least 1 black, and then you just multiply, you get the answer. So here, it was 120 years ago, people were less proficient with probability, so they gave to a wrong problem, because we are not looking for straight line. I want to remind you that our thing is actually not straight, it's rather wiggly. But even for straight line, they got the wrong answer. But then the editor writes, this solution is not entirely satisfactory, so if someone sends a correct one, we will publish it. Well, unfortunately, it took 100 years, and we're still joking whether we should write to American Mathematical Monthly. But okay, so this is an example where the pure curiosity and physics led to the same problem, which actually is related to many other things. Now that was example from physics, another example from chemistry. And this is, you all know that much of what happens in organic chemistry is about very long molecules, like polymers. So for example, DNA, it's very long. It's, if you take all the strands of DNA, it will be like a few meters long. Usually inside your cells, it's knotted in a ball like that. But some pieces of it, once in a while, they have to unwind. And the question which was posed by chemists, how they are positioned in space. And one famous chemist, Paul Fleury, who got Nobel Prize in chemistry in 1974, he suggested to model a polymer chain of length n by a self-avoiding walk. So you draw a curve on a lattice without self-intersections. So for example, here are two curves of length 2. Here are all possible curves of length 3 up to rotations. Here are all possible curves of length 4. And here already you know you cannot go around because you self-intersect. And then now on computer, you can easily count how many of them are for any given n. But back then in 74, it was difficult. What Paul Fleury did, he wrote some mathematical argument, not very rigorous. But he said that this curve, if it has length n, it goes not n away, obviously not n away because its generic curve will go back and forth, but n to the power 3/4. And his argument wasn't correct. It was a physics argument and there were two mistakes in it. So he knew perfectly that it's kind of approximate thing. You try to estimate something. And the number 3/4 is interesting because if you just do random walk without condition on no self-intersection, then you go n to the power 1/2 away. But if you condition that you don't self-intersect, you go further away. And that back then when he made this conjecture in 1948, mathematicians learned about it, but then physicists said that the argument wasn't correct, they forgot it. And then physicists returned, and actually physicists did much more precise conjectures. So for example, let's first ask how many self-avoiding walks of length n are there. So suppose this number is C of n. On a computer, you can count first 30 or 40 easily. What is easy to see is that C of n plus m is smaller than C of n times C of m. Why? Because if you cut your curve in two, then both halves are also self-avoiding. So for every n plus m curve, you get self-avoiding of length n times self-avoiding of length m. But not the other way around, because you can have good curve of length n, good curve of length m, but they too intersect. So there is an inequality here. Now it's immediately you deduce, that's Olympiad mathematics, that if you have convexity or concavity or things like that, then there will be a power growth. So it's, if you take logarithm, you have concavity, so there is a mu. So now it's an Olympiad problem. Show that mu depends on the grid. In particular, show that 3 is bigger than mu on square lattice, bigger than 2, bigger than mu on hex lattice, bigger than square root of 2. Well, the fact that 3 is bigger than mu on square lattice is easy because each time if I want to go further, here I can go up, left, or right. So there are 3 possibilities. So each time there are at most 3 possibilities, so it's most 3 to the power n. On the other hand, how do I get 2? If I always go right or up, I never self-intersect because I always go right or up. So these are things are easy, and the same for hex. If you want more difficult, just do the same thing, but do the same thing without. Let me just do the same thing without with strict inequalities, and then it shows that for two lattices it's different. So this is a typical part of math research. So it's in a paper which looks very much like Olympiad problem. But now the question, what is the value of mu? For square lattice, we don't know, but so let me just remove the annotations. But for hexagonal lattice, we proved it with Hugo Duminiu, my student 10 years ago. So we proved that for hexagonal lattice, this number mu is square root of 2 plus square root of 2, which is twice cosine of pi over 8. Well, there is this thing which shouldn't be there. Well, this oops. Yeah, there is this slash which shouldn't be there, and that number was actually predicted by physicists. So Bernard Nienhuis has a physics paper which says that it grows like that on hexagonal lattice. But moreover, if you write the next order term, it's lattice independent, it's n to the power 11 over 32. So now I have to maybe say a few words. So this solution is very much like an Olympiad problem. So I told it to high school students twice. It takes about 1 hour in all the details. What I cannot tell them how we arrived at it, because it's a pure combinatorics methods which you all know, some generating functions. But why we wrote exact this generation function, it's because we know a lot of physics and there are some fermions and other particles involved. So it's an example where it's an Olympiad problem when you ask, it's an Olympiad solution, but to arrive at this solution, you need to know more than just mathematics. What we did, we defined a function on the grid. So a function on every edge, which you function on edges, you can look at it as a flow of electricity or flow of water. And it satisfies the first Kirchhoff law you learn in school, that for every junction, the number of outgoing water is the same as the number of ingoing. And what remains is to prove the second law. If someone proves the second law, then you can deduce 11 over 32, and you can also get that this curve has fractal dimension 4/3, and it's actually the same as the previous one. But the second law we cannot do because it looks like it's not combinatorial statement, it's a statement you only have in the limit. So here, really more difficult mathematics begins. And maybe I'll give a third example. So it's since we started late. So should I give a third example from biology or should I finish now? What do you think, Parth?
A third example would be nice.
Okay, so that's an example from biology. And the first two were from physics and chemistry. And the questions were asked by physicists and chemists I haven't met. Here it was actual biologist who came to me. And he came and asked the question. So you have these pictures in percolation, and I have this picture. Are they similar? Is this a random coloring? So I looked at it for a while and I said, well, it looks like it is. And then he starts smiling and said, oh, then of course it is not. And it turned out that it is not. He already knew, he calculated correlations. It also turned out that this is a piece of a skin of a lizard, which is colored. Usually if you see snakes or lizards, usually they have some patterns, like geometric patterns, or sometimes the whole yellow, sometimes stripes, or sometimes circles. And here was a totally random color. Since then I learned that there are many lizards like that. I actually met them in mountains in Georgia, in Italy there are many of them. And what is more interesting is that he asked the question, how you get this pattern? So he kept them in a lab and made a picture every few days. And here is a movie of these pictures. Unfortunately, it's every picture every 2 weeks, so you don't really see much. So this is how the same lizard, 2 years of a life of lizard. So if you see, it started as a pattern of circles, but then some colors start flipping and you get this labyrinth pattern. So he conjectured that scales were flipping by some rules. And he read popular mathematical literature about cellular automata and game of life. So his conjecture was that it's flipping like game of life. So I bet that many of you have heard about game of life. So it was invented by a famous mathematician, John Conway, who unfortunately he died earlier this year of this and of COVID, of this virus. And the original notion of a modular was invented by even more famous guy, John Fontaine, who was instrumental in inventing in modern computers. And their idea was to model computer or the universe, and whether you can write some similar simple rules which will lead to complications. So here the rules are very simple. You color all the grid in 2 colors. Black is alive, white is dead. And if there is a living cell with 2 or 3 living neighbors, it remains alive. A dead cell which has exactly 3 living neighbors comes alive. All other cells die. So for example, cell which has too many neighbors, it dies from overcrowding, which has only one neighbor dies from loneliness. So it's very easy rule. If you have, if you are dead and you have 3 neighbors, you become alive. If you're alive, you have 2 or 3, you remain alive, otherwise you die. So here are examples of configurations. So there are stable configurations. So for example, here, this cell is alive. It has exactly 3 alive neighbors. It will be alive next turn also. This is also alive. This is also alive. This is alive. This has only 2 alive neighbors, so it remains dead. There are periodic. So this one, for example, pulsates. The center, it always has 2 alive neighbors. Now this odd turns, it has only 1 neighbor, it dies. Even turns, it has 3 neighbors, so it becomes alive. You can also pulsate with period 3 or with period 15. And that was already incredible, but that John Conway immediately noticed. But what people discovered soon, that you can actually come up with configurations which will slowly move. So this you can easily Google on the internet. When I was young, before internet, there were books of Martin Gardner where he discussed it, and you had to draw it on a piece of graphic paper. But on the internet, you can play with it, and you see that actually you can do even more complicated things. So this is an example. So this is a piece of Game of Life. So I covered it, or other people covered it, so that you see what is going on. The interesting thing is that, look, there are these things which go, but also there is a more complicated thing which creates them. And there is another thing which eats them. And then there are sequences of going things which get turned. And then there are sequences of them which bump into each other and create others. So it turns out that with very simple rules, you can create complicated behavior. And what is more interesting, that Game of Life is complicated enough to create a computer, to model a computer, because you see, you can transfer information from place A to place B. You can obviously store information, but you also can process it. You have transistors there. And since it can model computer, it can model, if you have a big enough sheet of paper, really big, it can model the universe. So the question, conjecture of Milenkovitch was that we have some cellular automaton on lizards, which eventually we have shown, and this is the actual lizard skin, and this is numerical simulation of the cellular automaton we had. And it really gives, because we have some parameter which is size of scales. If they are small, you get cellular automaton. If they are big, you get something else. And that's, you see on the lizard, you have bigger scales. But here it's an example when what we knew at the time wasn't enough, so we had to go and read much more. And we knew at the time that no one knows of any connection of Game of Life cellular automatons with covers on animals. But there is a wonderful paper of Turing, Alan Turing, the famous Alan Turing, who also used the first computer to break the Enigma code, about patterns in animals. And he wrote some equations, the so-called Turing equations or reaction diffusion equations, which can create with different parameters different patterns. So for example, let me just, here, wait a second. So it's solutions of these equations. I don't know why these two are frozen, but there are solutions which are pulsating. There are solutions which give you stripes. There are solutions which give you circles, and it's all kind of rests on a very easy idea, that suppose that you have one skin pigment, then it diffuses throughout the skin and you become one color. But suppose you have 2 pigments, and one is A, one is I, and I produces A produces I. But then suppose that you do slightly different, that I produces A and A kills I. And then you get a vicious circle. The more you get I, the more you get A, but then the more you get A, you kill I, so there is less I, then there is less A. But if there is less A, I is more produced. So you get this stripy behavior, because in some place there will be more I and more A, and the other will be less. And judging by the parameters, you get all these things. So no one believed Turing at the time. So this is a picture of Turing himself. This is of Benedict Cumberbatch playing Turing in a Hollywood movie. But what turned out that people have proved recently on already for fishes, not yet for zebras, that indeed the Turing equation plays their role. And what we did, we proved that if you have some sort of a animal with scales, it can be discretized, and it can be discretized sometimes to a really well cellular automata. So summing it up, I outlined for difference. IMO problem is likely to have a nice solution, but it's quite interesting that many research problems have nice solutions too. And of course, it's much more satisfying to come up with nice solutions, not to a problem you already know there is a nice solution, but no one expected. Also, IMO problem is likely solvable using limited number of methods, but okay, learning new methods is a lot of fun, inventing even more so. Now, the main difference is that research problems don't have a 4.5 hour time limit. Like Wiles worked on Fermat conjecture for Fermat theorem for 9 years, Carlson convergence of Fourier series for 9 years. This is the most important difference. And that's the main difficulty which people from Olympiads have with research, that you need to have more persistence. But there is one, of course, trick that you can switch problems, but you should return back. You shouldn't try it just for a day before passing to a new one, because then it's unlikely you do a lot. But well, that's probably the main difference. But again, it's a lot of fun to keep working on a problem, and you can talk to other people. That's the difference with Olympiads. So there is a social part which is interesting. And what I'm saying about selecting problems for your own, well, there are lots of problems floating around. There are lots of coming from other scientists. And it's really the social part, working with colleagues or colleagues even from other sciences, it brings a lot to mathematics. So I think I'll say thank you for your attention here. And I regret you weren't able to come in person to St. Petersburg. It's a very beautiful city. Maybe next time, well, I hope eventually we'll make it. For example, like we have a very good university in mathematics. So some of you, if you want, you can come as students or graduate students there to St. Petersburg State University. And in 2 years' time, we actually will be running an International Congress of Mathematicians. I hope by then the epidemics will be over. So thank you for your help, for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk. And if the audience has any questions, I request you to put them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. But yeah, I have a question. So how often do you find yourself reading non-mathematical texts like just biology or chemistry or physics?
You mean scientific texts, not belletristics?
Right, but yeah.
Yeah, no, not fiction, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Well, you know, I mean, I was always interested in physics, and as I said, some of the breakthroughs we had, it came from transferring physics intuition. We could not transfer their arguments. They turned out to be too difficult. They were not rigorous. So it's like you see an argument which explains, for example, for the argument of 4/3, I can explain it within 10 minutes. It's very easy. But then when you try to split it into 5 lemmas, I cannot split it in 5 lemmas. That's the problem. But we borrowed some intuition, so it was more like reading a fiction book, and you get some inspiration. Now, when we were doing this biology thing, I read quite a few biology things. That was actually more interesting because it turned out that all biology I learned in school is wrong by now, that the science has gone far, and it turned out that things we knew about genetics 30 years ago are not entirely correct. So yes, quite a lot, but it's different from reading mathematics books. Mathematics, you want to understand everything to the last detail, and there sometimes you have to take some things for granted because people know that something is like something, but they cannot prove it. But I read that's also a lot of fun to read books from other areas.
So would you call yourself a pure mathematician or?
Oh, well, yes, I think I'm pure mathematician. Well, I get my salary for being a pure mathematician, but I have papers in physics and biology, yes. And
so like
what?
When you started out with pure mathematics, did you think you would be doing so much work in chemistry or biology? Because I think most pure mathematicians, at least as students, we have the state of mind where we'll be doing only abstract maths.
No, when I started, I wasn't expecting it, but so I used to like physics. I participate in physics Olympiad a little bit less, because at the time you had to choose whether you go one ladder or another, because they were just the same on the same day, the city Olympiads. But yeah, I just naturally came into it. But obviously there are many questions which are interesting in mathematics, which are just motivated by mathematics. And sometimes they apply to physics or engineering, but you can do them without these applications. So I must have a question from Australia, from Freddie. How do you identify a field of research? So you see, I started working in mathematical analysis. So my first papers, they were about harmonic functions, about structural factor measures. So it's like pure mathematical analysis. Then when I did PhD, I switched to dynamical systems, but using a bit of a complex analysis in a stepping stone. And then I switched at one point to what is called statistical physics, so systems which have many components. And then now I do some neighboring areas, so I switched my area several times. It's interesting because I have many colleagues who never switch their area. They work all their life on the same thing, and it's a bit boring, I think. On the other hand, if you don't have this habit of switching area, it's very difficult to do the first time around. It's like learning a new language. If you learn 5 languages, probably it's easy to learn language number 6 and number 7. But if you know only one, it's more difficult. So I find it a lot of fun to study new areas, but that of course requires a lot of time, and usually you need to go into an area where you already have you have, how they say, some trumps up your sleeve, some trump cards up your sleeve, where you already could apply something, you know. But also it's a perfectly good thing to do one area very deeply for your life. Have you looked at this year's IMO problems? If so, what did you think of them? You know, I printed them out yesterday because I thought someone would ask me this question. I only looked at the last one about n to the power 1/3. And I haven't solved it because I looked in the morning. I was going to see a doctor, and on the tram I tried to solve it, and 10 minutes wasn't enough. So it's actually a perfect example of something which looks exactly like, not like mathematical problem, but a problem you can encounter in mathematical research. This problem about n 1/3. The difference would be that you wouldn't know the answer, you wouldn't know the power. So sometimes you would know that, okay, I need such estimate, I would prefer to have it with power 1/3, but I don't know what is the correct answer. And there it's if you are a research mathematician, it's immediately I like came up with 2 different arguments which give you power 1/2. That's almost immediate different. Dirichlet principles, you project on some line, and there are endpoints. Well, you can easily, or if there are 2 points, you can just project them and see which angles they will cover with small distance to spoil them. So this in the real world, in the math, you would first understand that you can do it with 1/2, then see whether it's enough to do what you want to do elsewhere. If it's not enough, you continue. But you'll be at a disadvantage compared to you guys because you know that the answer is 1/3, unless someone screw up. But the others, I just looked at formulation. I haven't thought about them because I had too many things to do. But no, I mean the formulation, they look okay, but well, okay, I will need twice 4.5 hours to solve them, or maybe, well, okay, my brain is a bit rusty. Okay, how hard? Unibolt Wolfram asks from Mongolia, Unibolt Wolfram, how hard is it to study other major fields of math by myself to finish PhD on my main field of study? Oh, well, you know, it depends on the field. So there are fields which are like, why, for example, Olympiad people prefer combinatorics. If you look at the Olympiad winners, many of them went into something related to combinatorics. So I heard a talk by Tim Gowers or Terry Tao. He works in analysis, but very much related to combinatorics. And I also do a lot of combinatorial things on the side. So what I did today about self-aware work, what I mentioned, it's pure combinatorics, but with a dash of physics. But there are fields which are more esoteric, where it's much harder to get some intuition. And usually for these fields, it's easier to study it not alone, but with a few friends. So my answer is that it's not difficult in the sense, it's not like bad difficult, it's good difficult. It's like good exercise can be a lot of fun even if you are tired. It's good difficult, and the best thing is not to do it alone. You can do it alone, but have a group of people to study together. So for example, when I switched to dynamical systems from analysis, so I went to graduate school, so mostly I learned things alone, but there was one other graduate student who also worked in the same direction, so we went through things together, and that was my advisor. But then when I switched to statistical physics, there were a few of us roughly from the same area from analysis, and we wanted to learn this piece of mathematics and physics, so we just had a met every week for a few hours, and someone would read a paper and then tell the details to others. So this is this social thing. It goes faster, but it's also a lot of time, a lot of fun. Yeah. So but it took some time, but it went much faster. And also then at one point you can start inviting people who are specialists there. Actually, a good way to learn some other area is to start a joint project with someone who already knows this area. So you find some place where you can contribute, and then he kind of gives you a ride, and then yeah. So it takes some time. It takes some time, but it's hard, but good way of card. Ah, it was originally the negative sign. It was 1/3 was missing. Yeah, okay. So it was n to the power 1/3. Oh, really? Can't believe it. Yeah, yeah. I need to spend. I don't know. As I said, I thought in my head without taking a piece of paper for 10 minutes today on a tram, and I couldn't do better than n to the power 1/2. But I will. Yeah, okay. I will think about it. I can also look at the questions which were on the internet before. At what age did you start showing interest towards mathematics? I don't know, maybe 10 or something, but not like Olympiad mathematics, like, you know, Martin Gardner's books, that sort of like riddles. It's, you know, when for people who were growing before the internet, there was much less distraction. So now if you want to read a book, you can read any book easily. You can download, watch any movie. Back then you could see a movie when it was on TV or on a cinema, and a book you needed to borrow from a library. And in that sense, that the good books, they had more attraction back then, because it was sort of commodity. A friend would bring you a book, said that it's like book about mathematics, it's a lot of fun to read, you would obviously read. Now you have much more choice. So there are lots of books in English literature, in Russian literature too. So I read them, I liked it, but I mostly thought of being an engineer rather than a mathematician. But of course, a good engineer needs to learn a lot of mathematics. Now the next question: what is the purpose of mathematical research in Olympiad problem solving in real life? Well, you know, it's a good question. What is the purpose of mathematical research? Short answer: I don't know. Well, we had mathematics for like 5,000 years now, and at least for 5,000 years now. Let me just maybe show you some other. I will show you a slide from another presentation I gave. So let me see. So it's 2000. So I will show a slide. The presentation is. Let me see. I will show you a couple slides. It's a presentation. Actually, I have to give it in French in 2 weeks' time, but I haven't translated to French, so I still have it in. I once gave it in Russian. So let me just show you a picture. So this is a picture from ancient Babylon, and this is a king receiving different gods who explain to him mathematics. And this king actually on this stele, it writes, so it's written here in Russian, but well, on the stele it's written in Babylonian, and on the slide it's written in Russian. If you don't read Russian or Babylonian, I will translate. So he says that I'm the wisest king. I can solve complicated mathematical problems about multiplication and division, those without simple solution, and can even solve quadratic equations. So that's a king. That's a king 4,000 years ago. And the tablets they have in his library, so he had a big library of like 50,000 tablets. So this is an example of a tablet there. So this tablet in 60 decimal system lists all the Pythagoras triples, first 20 of them, like 3, 4, 5, 5, 12, 13. So why people were doing this 4,000 years ago? I don't know. It's they obviously saw that there is some magic behind it, and they thought that they will understand the world better. Or for example, there is this tablet you see here. So this tablet, they have calculation of square root of 2 in base 60. And they had a very precise one. So they have, you see 1.4, so it's like 5 decimal digits. For engineering, back then, there was no need to know square root of 2 this well. And here's an Egyptian papyrus. So this tablet is in Columbia University. No, this one is at Yale University in United States. So actually, I held it in my hands. It's quite impressive. It's about that big. And this one, it's a papyrus, which is in Moscow. So it's about that big, but it's 3 meters long. And it has 30 problems, which are very much the problems you see now on like exams, like A levels in UK, like calculate the volume of a pyramid. So that's, well, Egyptians, of course. So you see, basically, even back then, people did mathematics not only for practical things, like calculating volume of pyramid was practical for Egyptians when you build a pyramid. It also has problems about how many wheat you need to make 10 barrels of beer. So there are practical problems, but also they had just curiosity about mathematics. And also there were like relations to astronomy already back then. So why do we solve mathematics? I think it's all the same, that people from other sciences like astronomers come with questions, or physicists, then there are engineers who come with questions, but then there is pure curiosity. It's a lot of fun to solve problems like on IMO. And it's interesting that these three motivations, they intervene, that sometimes things which people do for curiosity, they are used later for real research. Maybe the best example is that there is such notion, graph theory. So graph theory is prominent at IMO, the Bruin graphs. And people studied them, not a very large group of people, like, I don't know, 10, 20, studied them for the sake of graph theory. So they gave talks to other graph theorists who are much more numerous. And then when people started sequencing genome, it turned out that they needed this piece of graph theory. Because how you sequence genome? Genome, as I said, it's very long, so you put it in some chemical solution which cuts it into small pieces. And these small pieces are small enough that you can read them off. And now you have readings of small pieces and you have to glue the text back together. It's like, imagine you have a big novel and you cut it in small pieces, and like Sherlock Holmes, you have to assemble. Of course, with one copy of novel you cannot, but if you take 5,000 copies, cut each of them in different ways, then you can overlap in pieces you can do. And then the piece of mathematics they needed was already ready for that. Okay, and then I think there were two more. How different is research math from Olympiad math? Is the former more interesting? I think both are interesting. But research math, I would say it's more interesting. But it's you see, like with Olympiads, like you spend the day and certainly you have, maybe you won't win, but you still solve something, you get some satisfaction. With math, it might be that you work for a year without much progress, but then satisfaction is much bigger. So it's slightly different structure, but how helpful math Olympiad problem solving skills for future math career? You know, as I said, math career, it's not sprint. You work for a long time, but being able very fast come up with simple arguments is very useful, because often you want to understand fast whether you want to go this route or that route, and Olympiads, they actually help. But I think that the main problem which people who excel at Olympiads have with real research is that they expect to be able to do something very fast. and not always you can do something very fast. You must have patience. Now, so that was asked by Marvin Mario Martinez from Bolivia. Now, well, from this email I can guess the name. I love to solve Olympiad problems for fun, but I don't really know if I should take math for university or computer science. How should I know if I'm ready for it? You know, I think in modern world, mathematical education or theoretical computer science is one of the best investments. If you're thinking, if you don't know what to do for bachelor's degree and you are good at math, then you should do math. That's clear for me. Because you see, it's like if you have bachelor's degree in psychology, can you do PhD in math? Well, it's very difficult. If you have bachelor's degree in math, can you do PhD in psychology? Yeah, trivially, because math can be applied even there. So I think it's bachelor's degree, it's sort of clear. Just choose a university which has good bachelor's program, do math there, and then you can see. If you hesitate between math and computer science, I think that the best thing is to do math, even if you want to move in computer science, because most of computer science, which is on the surface, which doesn't require deep mathematics, has already been done. Now, if you look, like even mobile phone of today, it has lots of complicated mathematics just to remove errors when it's transmitting, to store bank data safely, like Google Pay, for example, it uses like advanced mathematical algorithms. And yeah, and the guy who did, he specializes in math rather than computer, though he's in computer science department. So I would say that really, even if you don't want to be a mathematician, going to a bachelor's degree in math is a good investment. And then you'll see whether you want to be a mathematician at the end. Because it's the same thing. It's if, for example, you want to be an engineer or you want to work as an analyst in a bank, it's better first to have math education. It's easier to learn other things afterwards. Now, let me see. Yeah, that's, I think, was already how different the sewing research problems compare. Yeah, that was already asked. How did you define field research and came into contact with your doctor or advisor? Well, you see, I mean, my first paper I wrote with my undergraduate advisor, and that was just, we were in the second year of bachelor, and a group of our professors decided to reform the curriculum. And before they reformed it, they decided that in our class, they would just give advanced courses to second year students. So there were these 4 advanced courses, topics courses given to second year students. We started going and they gave lots of problems. So I solved one of the problems and then I started working with that professor. And with the guy who became my doctoral advisor was similar. I went to a seminar he was giving for 4th year students when I was second year student, and he, well, actually it started, I caught him, he formulated some theorem with mistake. So I caught him by his hand, then he reformulated again with mistake. I came up with a counter exam and then we start working together. But basically I met by going to some course and solving exercises there. But also it's sort of a good thing because you tried something, you had something easier, which is like Olympiad problems, but then you pass slowly under someone's guidance to something more serious. Now, what memory you prefer, your IMO medal or your Fields medal? I don't know. I was already telling to Parth that I lost my IMO medal when I was moving houses, and I did, well, or maybe it's somewhere, I don't know, in the closet. I mean, both are nice experience. I think with the IMO medal, it was probably more fun, really, to solve actually in both cases, it was more fun to solve the problems than to get the medal for that. So it's with the IMO, then when you realize that you solved the last problem and still have like 2 hours to write it down, so everything looks great. And the same thing with big problems. Usually, what happens is that you work, and then usually there is a specific moment when you realize that there is this missing piece, and now there are many more details to be filled. You might spend like 3 weeks, or maybe even 2 months, but you know that now you have the idea and it fits perfectly, and that moment is very nice. And that's actually similar to solve an Olympiad problem, but it's just a bigger emotion. I think on the internet, I think, or maybe let me just see, do I have, no
I
other
think
questions.
those are all.
Yeah.
So personally, which one do you prefer, having the long research problems or the short Olympiad type problems? Which one do you like to solve?
Oh, you know, I don't know. I mean, of course, short in a sense is nice. It's because it's quicker. But I was just sort of just thinking what I was discussing with one of my students yesterday what to do, and I start looking at which projects I have, which I haven't like on slow burner that I try to do. So I have at least like, I don't know, 10 projects I work on for last 20 years on and off. So I take a break of 10 months, then I think for a week, and then I advance a little bit, then I think more if I don't advance. So there are obviously problems which I would really want to solve, but I see that I can't now because I don't know enough. And sometimes I don't have stamina to work them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but I keep returning and progress a little bit. Of course, fast, you know, I have very good friends who are very serious mathematicians who put a limit that they don't work for longer than something on a problem. Like there was a famous Belgian mathematician, Jean Bourgain. He unfortunately died last year, or I think last year. Yes, so he was one of the sort of most important people in analysis. And he had this Olympiad mentality. He was very fast, one of the fastest people I know in thinking. So he had a rule that he doesn't work for more than a week on a problem. And he still wrote like 30 papers per year, meaning that, well, like 50 weeks a year, he works no more than a week. Well, he works no more than a week. If there is no progress, he stops after a week. But he was really very good, and his papers are not easy by any means. So most of the things other people weren't able. I was his postdoc, and I suggested him. No, when I was his postdoc, he fell ill and he was away for the whole year. But I once returned to the same institute for a month, and I suggested him to work on a problem, and we tried to do it for a week, and then he said no. We had made no progress, we stopped. And I said, well, okay, but I expect it's a problem for like 2 years, not a week. And I said, well, it's too difficult for us. So it's a bit, you can have this philosophy, but then I think if everyone has this philosophy, some problems will be forever unsolved.
Okay.
But it's good that there are people who attack many things also.
Right.
So I got also a question, is it hard to solve IMO combinatorics as a research mathematician? No, I don't know. It depends which area you work. I mean, you know, it's no, I don't think. Obviously, as a research mathematician, I mean, you maybe know a little bit more tricks, which are more difficult tricks, and also you have more experience in the sense that years they convert into experience. Maybe you don't think as fast, but you need more experience, so you get more intuition where to go. But of course, you are not. Don't know what is the fashion in Olympiads last 5 years, what kind of combinatorial problems were there. Because when I participated in Olympiads, it was slightly different. It's like the same evolution as chess. Like chess 60 years ago, you had to come up with new ideas. Now the main thing is first to remember everything which was played over the last 60 years. So with Olympiads, I found that there was this transformation that it's very now much more difficult to come up with new idea for a problem than 30 years ago. So people have an edge if they have solved through all the problems of all national Olympiads. It wasn't exactly the case 30 years ago. Yeah, but in combinatorics, I don't know what other combinatorics on this Olympiad, because I remember these points, which is combinatorics. I don't remember whether there is another one. I haven't read the first day. I only read the second one. So it's
okay. So if there are no more questions, we could conclude by, do you have any advice for the current IMO participants?
Well, I mean, first, don't despair with this coronavirus epidemics. Take it seriously, but don't despair. Well, spend more time reading. One positive thing is, like Isaac Newton, he wrote all his important mathematics and physics during the pandemic of plague, and Shakespeare wrote quite a few plays during the previous pandemic of plague, 100 years before Newton. So use this time wisely. So one good thing which happened because of pandemic, there are many more online resources than before. So now, first, there are many more online resources, but also it's easier to talk to people online. People got more accustomed to it, so you can easily communicate. And the advice is go to university to study mathematics is the best investment nowadays. And even if you don't want to be mathematicians, if you want to move elsewhere, go into math. And all the best.
That's really good advice. Thank you very much, Stanislav. And thank you very much to all the audience for participating in the discussion here. Great. Thank you.